G'day guys, today I'm taking a close look at quite a few variations of the hip extension movement and how to progress and regress effectively. Let's have a look and see how it's done.
Okie doke. So it all kind of starts on the floor. And I guess the first thing I'd like to say about the hip extension is that it's just a regression of the squat pattern to the floor. So if you've got a client that doesn't have the strength to squat or is new to the gym, I think it's always a good place to start, just to get the glutes firing and start working on that hip hinge pattern. I'd also like to say that the band I'm using in the video is not the regular band I would use for this external rotation, external rotator hip strengthening. You're much better off with a band that's a good 2 inches so it doesn't pick up any of the IT band. The thinner bands tend to pick up the IT band. So all the weight's on my heels. Sometimes with this exercise it's just 1 rep at a time for some clients. But usually for me, the point at which I progress the exercise is when they're capable of doing 3 lots of 15 to 20, pretty continuous and able to keep constant tension. They're not getting any back pain. They've very much improved the activation that they're feeling in their glutes, and they're ready to step it up a little bit. So feet on the bench, that's just adding more range of motion. There is more of a strength requirement in this exercise. It's pretty much the same pattern though. It's all about the thing with this. The exercise, the tension that you're creating in the hips is coming through the foot, right? And the other thing too is we don't want to put the weight on the floor unless the client needs to, right? So that you'll feel your shorts touch the floor, or maybe just your skin touch the mat, right? So you're keeping that tension in the hamstrings, in the glutes, and then you drive through the heel, and that will lift the hip. And you've already pre-activated the glute, or you've kept tension in the glute in the stretch position, and you've held that tension. You'll notice in that last rep I put myself into hyperextension, so I went past a straight line between knee and shoulder just to show you what not to do. We want to just work in a full range of motion where we've got maximum glute activation and the lower back's not going to take over, because that's very common. Third version of the exercise, my knees are now outside 90 degrees, so there's more emphasis on the hamstring in this version of the exercise. It's all same though. You'll notice at the top the knee, the hip and the shoulder line up, right? And I've got my hands on my hamstrings now, not my glutes. I mean, the glutes are still heavily involved, but it's, I'm really trying to dominate and get some strength into the hamstrings as well. You notice my foot position is now parallel, where before it was wider and the toes were pointing out, to really try and get that glute firing as much as I can. Those floor-based exercises all have a bit of load on the neck, all right? So tongue on the roof of the mouth and hold that chin in a nice neutral position. So once they've achieved 3 lots of 15 to 20 on the floor, we'll step it up to the ball. With the torso on the ball and the feet on the floor, it's the least unstable. You'll notice once we start doing these movements, you'll notice that as the hips drop down, it drags the head off the ball. Don't lead with the head, just wait for the head to naturally be pulled in that direction so that the head just flows with the rest of the spine. So you'll notice that as the hip reaches full extension, the thoracic goes into extension, so the chest comes up and then the head should touch down on the ball. It's a little bit late on that one, but that's what you're really aiming for. You'll also notice that the knees are spread, they're pointing in the same direction as the toes. So it's a real glute emphasis. There's a lot of medial hamstring and adductor going on as well, but it's really trying to focus on the glutes. And I usually encourage my clients to actually stick their thumb or fingers into their butt to really bring that awareness to the muscle, because the glutes are so lazy. So once they've achieved 15 to 20 of that version, we'll then put the feet on the ball, but we'll stabilize the ball with either a bench or the wall. This is a lot more unstable once we take that bench or the wall away. So I'll usually do one in between if I think the client needs it. the message with this is these are, yes, all the progressions. Do I use them all with everyone? No, definitely not. Just you know, good to be aware of how to progress through to really, you know, keep your client progressing and the exercise changing slightly without them getting bored and, you know, obviously not injuring them. I started moving my arms around a bit on this set, so when I've got a really wide arm position, I'm creating a lot of stability in the, you know, with my arms and the back of my shoulders with my arms out. Then as I bring my hands closer to the body, there's less stability. Hands across the chest, well then my arms are not involved in the stability at all, and hands, you know, up in the air is just that next progression. Okay, so just as we finish this exercise, we move towards the one where I've taken the ball away from the bench, and you know, after 5 sets of these in a row and not doing them in quite a while, you know, it was a good old challenge for me. So you know, with this one, it's exactly the same as everything that I just went through with you on all of the other exercises. Obviously, there's a lot more stability, you know, instability involved in this exercise, and when there's more instability, the muscles have to work and fire a lot harder. So the challenge in my hamstrings, especially with this exercise, was, you know, noticeably harder. I don't always use this version of the exercise because obviously it doesn't have as much carryover to, you know, pushing off a solid ground in a closed chain like this version. So with this one, you know, they're kind of ready now to load with weight. So this would be where, you know, you'd bring in like a, you know, a barbell, or, you know, you might hold a medicine ball or whatever it might be, just add a little bit of weight on the hips. So as I come up, I don't think I've mentioned, I'm tucking the pelvis under. You can see me sort of holding my pelvis and pulling my belly button towards my face. That puts the lower back in a very weak position, and it really encourages the glute to fire. So as I go down, that hip position might relax a little bit, but every time I come up on the breath out, I'm really squeezing that hip under, head back on the bench, so I'm not loading the neck unnecessarily. And then we move over to a static hip extension, because all these hip extensions are just preparing the client to be able to do the Swiss ball hip extension knee flexion. So you actually need a lot of strength in this static position. I've made a separate exercise just for that movement. That's the one where the hips lift first and then you pull the ball in. It's a lot more challenging, and this is the position that we need to hold, you know, for a good 2 minutes or so comfortably, and usually by that stage the client is able to do 6 reps of the Swiss ball hip extension knee flexion pretty well. You'll notice with this one that the feet are parallel, so there's a lot of hamstring involvement in that, and then I go into what I call an adductor Swiss ball adductor squeeze. The feet are right out, and the focus here is really on the inner thigh, just building up that strength again in that static hip extension position, preparing the client again for the hip extension knee flexion on the Swiss ball, which once again I've made a separate video for, which is an amazing exercise for runners and a lot of people doing athletics, but it requires a lot of strength in both hamstring and glute in full hip extension to perform it well. Alright guys, that wraps up the progressions of the hip extension. There are more. Obviously, I haven't gone into single leg variations, but I think that'll give you, a good understanding of the exercise itself and also how to progress and regress it. Cheers.